Okay, we're back to lesson 1.02. We were in the midst of our reading, so we will continue. And I'll start right here, growing cities, growing problems. Oh, before I do that, let's hear restating at the why. Migrants from the American countryside, intimidated by the city, could find a comforting touch at the familiar at the Young Men's Christian Association, the YMCA, and the Young Women's Christian Association, the YWCA. The YMCA adopted as its mission the improvement of the spiritual, mental, and social, physical condition of young men. The Y provided young people, most of them new arrivals in the city, with clean dormitory rooms to live in while maintaining the traditional Christian values they had learned on the farm or in the small town. And as many of you probably know, the YMCA and YWCA is still growing today in many American cities. Growing cities, growing problems. From 1860 to 1920, the number of people living in cities with more than 8,000 residents increased from 6.2 million to 54.3 million. The problems that afflicted American cities in the years before the Civil War, overcrowding, disease, violent crime, grew worse as the urban population exploded during the second wave of immigration in the late 19th century. Many city dwellers lived in cramped, crowded conditions like densely concentrated brick row houses of Philadelphia. New arrivals poured into New Orleans and Richmond faster than developers could build new housing. In these southern cities, many of the poorest residents were packed into buildings that had once been slave quarters. Shoddy construction of housing, factories, and shops left cities vulnerable to disasters like Chicago's Great Fire of 1871. In the late 19th century, few cities had modern sanitation services. City residents walked along unpaved streets filthy with garbage and horse manure. They often drank contaminated water. Inadequate sewer systems failed to dispose of human waste. Epidemics of cholera, typhoid fever, and tuberculosis spread across American cities. And here's a picture of a tenement, an apartment dwelling in New York. Life in the tenements. In the Gilded Age, some of the greatest accumulations of wealth in the world existed side by side with some of the worst poverty and squalor. In New York City, for example, Henry Clay Frick, a captain of industry, and the powerful banker J.P. Morgan lived in enormous mansions, since turned into museums. Elsewhere in the city, the poor lived in crowded apartment buildings called tenements. These shoddily constructed and overcrowded buildings, stifling in summer and freezing in winter, were breeding grounds for disease and crime. The miseries of tenement life were brought to national attention in How the Other Half Lives, a book published in 1890 by Jacob Riis. An immigrant from Denmark, Riis had known hard times when he first arrived in America and could not find work. Eventually, he became a reporter and photographer for New York newspapers, and he used his talents to make the public aware of the poverty and hardships of life for many city dwellers. The tenements, wrote Riis, are the hotbeds of the epidemics that carry death to the rich and poor alike, the nurseries of pauperism and crime that fill our jails and police courts, that touch the family life with deadly moral contagion. Riis noted that the law defines a tenement as a house occupied by 3 or more families, living independently and doing their cooking on the premises, or by more than 2 families on a floor, so living and cooking and having common rights in the halls, stairways, yards, etc. In contrast to this bland legal definition, Riis described the reality he observed and photographed. It no longer excites even passing attention when the sanitary police report counting 101 adults and 91 children in a Crosby Street house, one twins built together. The children in the other, if I am not mistaken, numbered 89, a total of 180 for 2 tenements. Or when a midnight inspection in a Mulberry Street and there's 150 lodgers sleeping on filthy floors in 2 buildings. Crime in the cities. In How the Other Half Lives, Jacob Riis cited a report by the Secretary of the Prison Association of New York. The report looked into the cause of the rise of urban crime. The report noted that the vast majority of crimes were committed by individuals who have either lost connection with home life, never had any, or whose homes had ceased to be sufficiently separate, decent, and desirable to afford what are regarded as ordinary wholesome influences of home and family. The report further noted that the younger criminals seemed to come almost exclusively from the worst tenement house districts. Riis described the rise of youth gangs in New York. And this is just a section from his report, The Other Half Lives, which you should read, but we're not going to go through it right now in class. Here's a picture of some boys sleeping on a steam grate. Powerful pictures that he took as part of his expose. And here's another picture. Crowded, busy, dirty Mulberry Street in New York City, an area Jacob Riis explored in How the Other Half Lives. Okay. A youth gang, who's talking about not only on the best terms with the rivals in the next block, but all the common program, defiance of law and order. Such gangs, Riis concluded, are the ripe fruit of tenement house growth. Not just New York, but many American cities confronted rising rates of crime. New residents often failed to find steady jobs, and sometimes even steady work paid such low wages that people had trouble supporting their families. Desperation fed growing rates of robbery, burglary, and murder in American cities. As the problem of the cities were brought to light by Reese and others, reformers tried to help the poor and improve urban life. The following chapter will explore the efforts of some of these reformers. Social Darwinism. In the Gilded Age America, some thinkers were able to rationalize the desperate misery in the cities, as well as the massive gap between the wealthiest and poorest Americans, as a necessary part of the evolution of the social order. Ever since the publication in 1859 on the Origin of Species by the British naturalist Charles Darwin, people had used the concept of evolution to explain phenomena far beyond the biological forces of Darwin's theory. Based mainly on careful studies of differences in the beaks of finches in the Galapagos Islands, Darwin put forward his theory of natural selection. As Darwin saw it, in the overpopulated realm of nature, creatures are born with different traits, and they compete for limited resources. The creatures most likely to survive, and thus most likely to reproduce and pass on their traits, are those whose traits make them best suited to win the struggle for limited resources. It was not Darwin himself, but others who developed concepts of social Darwinism, taking the idea of evolution based on a competitive struggle for limited resources and using it to explain human social realm. Perhaps the most influential advocate of social Darwinism was the British philosopher Herbert Spencer. It was Spencer, not Darwin, who coined the phrase often associated with Darwin, survival of the fittest. In Spencer's view, the evolution of society was by definition a matter of progress and eventual improvement. Since society was naturally evolving for the better, thought Spencer, it was unwise for government to regulate business or intervene with social programs. Even acts of charity were questionable. In an article in an 1878 issue of Popular Science Monthly, Spencer wrote that fostering the good for nothing at the expense of the good is extreme cruelty. William Graham Sumner. Spencer's ideas influenced William Graham Sumner, a professor at Yale University who became the leading advocate of social Darwinism in the United States. Sumner argued for complete laissez-faire economic and social policy. He opposed any attempt to change what he called the natural laws of social development. He argued against any government regulation of business or programs designed to promote social or economic equality. Sumner argued that if we do not like the survival of the fittest, we have only one possible alternative, and that is the survival of the unfittest. If the unfittest is about to perish, wrote Sumner, and is about to survive and maintained at the expense of B, the fittest, then this process, a lowering of social development, and a working backwards, not forwards. Sumner argued that Americans had become sentimental about the poor and unnecessarily suspicious of the rich. It is not uncommon, wrote Sumner, to hear a clergyman utter from the pulpit all the old prejudice in favor of the poor and against the rich. But countered Sumner, the aggregation of large fortunes is not a thing to be regretted. On the contrary, it is a necessary condition of many forms of social advance. In Sumner's thinking, competition for wealth was a good thing, as it would favor those willing to struggle and work hard over the lazy and morally inferior. Especially in a new country, said Sumner, where resources are strained to the utmost all the time, the judgment, courage, and perseverance required to organize new enterprises, carry them to success, are sometimes heroic. Persons who possess the necessary qualifications obtain great rewards. They ought to do so. It is foolish to rail them. Millionaires, asserted Sumner, are the product of natural selection. All right, and that's where we're going to stop here for the reading. And if we go back to our lesson, it says complete the reading guide. So you should be sure to have that completed. You should be sure to have the reading guide completed. And then it says also come to your census activity sheet. So if you go to lesson resources, you can find that. And you see there's a few questions from this table here, a few questions to answer. And if you have any problems with that, don't be afraid to look at your lesson answer key to help you come up with those answers. And then lastly, complete the 1.02 checkpoint. Over here, click on that and begin your checkpoint to answer the few questions, and you can use your completed reading guide on that checkpoint. So good luck on your checkpoint, and that is all. The end.